Hello, today I am going to be presenting the first part of the Men on the Moon presentation. In a course such as this one, basically robot visions, technology will often be examined through a lens of progress, innovation, and really of the future. And many of the texts we will or have studied will ask an important question, or what I think is an important question actually. Does technological advancement truly improve human life, or can it create new forms of disconnection or even harm? I think that Simon J. Ortiz's short story, Men on the Moon, will directly fit into this conversation. While the Apollo 11 moon landing is often celebrated in mainstream American narratives as one of humanity's greatest achievements, Ortiz will present it in a very different perspective, I think. From an indigenous point of view, technological expansion is not associated only with discovery and human triumph, but also with colonization, environmental destruction, and the loss of their culture. Ortiz's story that will therefore challenge the dominant American narrative that basically technological achievement automatically represents human advancement. Through indigenous cultural values and powerful environmental symbolism, Ortiz will suggest that mindless and excessive development and mechanization will lead to spiritual and intellectual emptiness, really. His story will ask us to reconsider whether technological progress is truly meaningful if it comes at the expense of balance of the natural world and of human life. Now I'm going to give you guys a bit more cultural context and really info on Simon J. Ortiz, because I think that will help us understand his writing more. Simon J. Ortiz is considered one of the most respected and widely read Native American poets and writers. He is from the Acoma Pueblo community in New Mexico, and his cultural background strongly shapes his literary text, and I think that his culture is inherent within all of his writing. Ortiz has often connected his writings to the struggles that were faced by indigenous people in the American Southwest, but also everywhere around the world, particularly those caused by Western expansion and colonization. So these will include the building of railroads, land development, and uranium mining, which actually can relate to the mining on the sky text that we have read and had a presentation on. These industries have directly affected indigenous land and communities, which I think Ortiz makes that really clear throughout his writing. Notably, I think that it's really interesting to learn about that Ortiz and his father have both worked in those environments that were connected to the destruction of their land, which creates an interesting power dynamics as they were forced to work in these industries that did not align with their values to be able to afford to live, really. So I think that this has influenced his way of thinking. Because of history, when characters in Men on the Moon observe the Apollo 11 rocket, they maybe don't see it through the same celebratory lens as the mainstream American and even, I would say, worldwide culture does. Their interpretation is really shaped by, I think, historical memory, which links to the importance of elders in the community and how indigenous communities believe that knowledge is held by the elders, which Faustin, the main character of the story, is an elder. The most important scene, or I should say passage or chapter of this story, it really centers around this character. After having seen the moon landing on his TV in his living room with his grandchildren, Faustin, when he sees it, he definitely doesn't seem to quite understand why the Americans decided to go to the moon to pick up rocks for knowledge. He seems to follow indigenous views, which would lead us to believe that you might think that knowledge is in nature and people and not necessarily in rocks from the moon. After that same night, actually, he has a dream where he seems to see a skew machina, or which is, I think, a word that he uses to refer to the Apollo 11 rocket. This machine is described as making a humming noise, shining in the sunlight, having long metal legs. At first it might seem impressive, but it also seems kind of wrong. It doesn't seem to fit in with its environment. It seems kind of misplaced, and that fear is proven right when the tone shifts. It starts stepping on trees, which is a very disturbing imagery, actually. Flowers and even grass. It's destroying nature. It's also scaring the deer, but not just the deer, the prey, also the coyote, the predator, which this, I think, is deeply meaningful, because the predator should never be scared in its own environment. It seems deeply wrong that it is scared by a machine, something that doesn't even belong there. Also, I think that an added layer to this is that in indigenous communities, animals are sensitive to imbalances in the natural world, so they seem to sense that the machine does not belong and is not right. There's another example of powerful symbolism in this scene, which I think it's the strongest one in the entire story, the symbolism of water. As the machine follows Flintwing Boy, which seems to be Faustin, I think, it splashes through a stream of clear water. The water boiled and streaks of oil flowed downstream. Here, the water, which is a symbol of life, purity, continuity. Well, there can be no life with no water. The water, it becomes contaminated. We can no longer, if, for example, we have a plant, if we water it with boiling, oily water, the plant will die. The water can no longer be used. This moment is really powerful because it shows how the machine has destroyed the life bringer and even stopping other things from remaining alive. It might be like a premonition that be machinery, if we continue using it excessively with no regards for nature, that we will not be able to survive as humans. Furthermore, I think there's definitely a layer of historical pattern that Ortiz is trying to show us, how machinery will enter an indigenous space and will destroy it. The machina is basically a representation of those invasions, the railroads, the drilling equipments, the mining machinery that have entered indigenous lands under what I would call the banner of progress. But these results have long-term damage for indigenous communities and especially for nature. I think that this story is showing us indigenous perspective on the future, which we could call it indigenous futurity, which would definitely link to Afrofuturism. I'm pretty sure I didn't explain it right during my presentation, but I meant to say was that Afrofuturism is reimagining technology and the future through a Black culture perspective when they appropriate the future, because Black people have often been excluded from these types of advancements due to racism. And I think that this is definitely relates to this text, because I think that this text shows us an indigenous perspective on the future. And I think that's where I got confused. I made it seem like the Afrofuturism was merely giving a perspective on technology, when it's much more than that. It's related to culture and the future. And I think that this text is an example of the indigenous futurity, which is related to indigenous values, which include thinking of the past and of nature. That's what I meant to say. And basically, to conclude quickly, because I don't have a lot of time left, I think that Ortiz does not claim that innovation is inherently evil, but that Viewing it through the indigenous perspective allows us to see that it repeats patterns of destruction sometimes, and that we have to be aware of this to make sure that we don't repeat this destruction elsewhere, like on the moon, or in order to attain things like the moon.